Thank you. We are going to call this meeting to order now. It is 6:33 p.m. on January 9, 2023, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Officer Accountability. Luisa o María, si pueden por favor dar la información para la interpretación en español.
Yes. Lenguaje e interpretación. Tenemos interpretación en inglés y en español, el lenguaje de señas. Están por medio de la cita de Zoom. Esta es una cita pública. Es parte de la ciudad, el Código Administrativo de la Ciudad y conducido bajo las provisiones de las reuniones, las leyes de Oregon, la ley ORS 192.610/690. La función del chat de Zoom tiene también transcripciones que son incluidas en las juntas que son grabadas. La función de preguntas y respuestas de Zoom para cualquier pregunta que usted... Para preguntas solo, sin comentarios, no todas las preguntas podrán ser contestadas. Si son contestadas, las preguntas y las respuestas serán incluidas en los récords de la ciudad de esta reunión. Otra pregunta puede ser incluida en la agenda, la planeación para los comités futuros. Listo.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Christine and Mary. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance, but please note that this is an automatic captioning services and is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other languages support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for access, assistance, and including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to the City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon State Law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. Now I will pass it to the co-chairs for the land acknowledgement.
Co-chair Michelle Wesley asked me to do this again. I am Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a co-chair of the subcommittee, a member of the commission. And I realize what I'm saying before I read this acknowledgement that comes from the city of Portland, I say this isn't exactly what I would say. It's because I would say something stronger, not because I would say something weaker, just in case anybody checking the record is wondering what I mean by that. All right, so we acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Calumet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize that the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction and the river and land of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Now we're going to review our community agreements. Our community agreements have a couple pages. What we're gonna do is gonna give time for each page to be read by you. And at the end, I can ask the question. Thank you. Please, can we go to the next page? To the next page, please. Now, if I can ask the question, do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our college and collaborators if needed? And if so, please, if I can see your hands, or thumbs up. Thank you very much. I will pass it over to the co-chairs to discuss our timeline.
I'm Commissioner Co-Chair Charlie Michelle Wesley. I will share the timeline with you. This meeting is a part of the Police Accountability Commission's powers and duties phase of work, which focuses on the functions of the new system. Future phases of work will develop the form of the new system, as well as how it relates to the rest of the city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one. The Commission will present all proposed changes to the City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval. Slide 8. This slide shows the outcome document for the powers and duties phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the Commission. This subcommittee will focus on how the new system will access the information it needs to do its work. Slide 9. This slide is the current project plan for the powers and duties phase of the Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout the phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the Commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among Commission members as to the functions of the new system. Today's meeting is part of the green box with the red border near the middle of the screen. Following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the Police Accountability Commission. Specifically, we'd like to highlight the full PAC will have its next meeting on Thursday, January 19th. The Commission is planning a community listening session and Q&A for tomorrow, Tuesday, January 10th. The subcommittee has a tentative work session for Saturday, January 21st, which is likely to be the last meeting of the subcommittee. I will now turn it over to well, it goes back to the facilitator and then to Dan, co-chair Dan Handelman.
Thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. And I will pass it to Co-Chair Dan.
Thank you. So today's, our meeting is going to include that we're going to work through this draft of the officer accountability areas of agreement, which is, you will see, it's not exactly like the other areas of agreement you've seen before. And we're going to try to get things ready for referring this to the full PAC for consideration sometime later this month, we hope. And we, for people in the audience, we will hear public comment during this meeting at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are going to hear back from members of the subcommittee on what they have been updating in the draft document since our last meeting. And if
All right, thank you. Basically, our last meeting was in December, and the holidays came in between, but almost every single person on this subcommittee participated in a work session or more than one in between. Co-chair Michelle Wesley and I attended all of them, and there were quite a few. What we did was we worked through the questions that we had raised in the discussion points document that we didn't finish on December 19, and moved them into what you're going to look at tonight, which is an outline of the whole proposed with the workflow for the system. That outline has flagged in it the areas of discussion that we couldn't resolve because we were outside of a public meeting. But everything from our discussion exists in the documents that we're looking at, so that the public can know that we weren't doing anything outside the public eye, that you can't look at the discussions we were having because they're reflected in these documents. But just before we get into the other stuff, I just want to read the mandate that is listed at the top of our outline that explains what we were asked to do as a subcommittee, right? So we were asked to describe the case handling process and investigative process, and that includes a workflow description. We had to look for compliance with state laws, which we did to the best of our ability. We're not lawyers. And consideration of the existing procedure, meaning the existing IPR and CRC system, and how the addition of the new board, which is called in the chart of the Community Police Oversight Board, how that's going to change things. So I think we did a good job at that. So audience can see that. So I'm going to give it back to my co-chair, and then I'm going to show you one more document before we get started on reviewing the outline. So,
thank you, Co-Chair Handelman. I just wanted to bring to your attention that out of the many inputs we've had from community, this is one that we are especially trying to keep in mind as we create this document. And this is public comment. Whenever a crime is committed, nothing happens due to qualified community, police union, etc. I want a commission to have the power to say, no, you have committed something that is illegal and there are real consequences. We should analyze the evidence as they would in a trial against us and determine this officer is failing at his or her duties and cannot keep their job. They should have the ability to say this officer has failed and should not be in a position of power over anyone in their community. That to me seems like goal number one. And that was presented to us on November 17th. I will turn it back to Co-Chair Dan Handelman.
Thank you. So obviously, if anybody has questions, comments, or concerns along the way, please let us know. So we're about to look at a flow chart that was created by Commissioner Faith Aiken as a favor to the subcommittee. But before we jump into that, I just want to say the three big takeaway items of what I think this subcommittee is going to be proposing for the system are these three things. Number one, that there will be an advocate assigned to the community member from the beginning of the process. That doesn't happen right now. Number two, that we're proposing, I believe, that internal affairs will only be used for cases where officers complain against other officers, and never for when there's a community member involved. And third, similarly, what is now the Police Review Board will only exist if it needs to for those complaints, the complaints where it's an officer against an officer. So it's not going to be a behind closed doors meeting of those police review boards for community member cases if our workflow is accepted by City Council eventually. All right, so if we can look at that flow chart, that was, and I don't know if that did this get out to the rest of the subcommittee today, staff? Probably didn't have a lot of time to get to them.
No, not unless they look in the last few seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just, yeah. This came in pretty late. So okay. So you know, and I know there's a lot, and there's several arrows on here. I'm going to just try to be as broadly descriptive as possible so we can jump into doing our work tonight. But the idea is that we start with this interaction between the PPB and a community member that can involve a shooting or something less serious that leads to either the person becoming the complainant, whether or not they file the complaint. They get assigned an advocate. At this point, there's a preliminary investigation, and either the complaint gets dismissed, and the complainant can appeal that. They can ask to go talk to the supervisor, which has to be agreed upon as a way of solution for solution, or it goes to mediation. And if the mediation isn't successful, it can go to investigation, which is the next slide. Okay. And again, I don't want to discuss all these pieces right now. We're going to get to them later. I'm just sort of trying to give you an overview. All right. So the next thing that happens is if the police officer complains, they could choose, according to what we've drawn up, they could choose to go through the board if they don't trust internal affairs, and then that'll go to the same preliminary investigation as the community member. But if they decide to go to internal affairs, then internal affairs will do the investigation. Okay, next slide, please. Now all this is going to be decided on by the full commission at some point. So this is just what we're looking at tonight. All right. So then the full investigation, there's the administrative investigation that's going on. That's the staff of the board does that. If it gets dismissed at this point, they can appeal that if they have more evidence. I think that might be something that we need to tweak and fix up a little bit. So after the administrative investigation, that investigative report goes to the a hearings panel, and we'll get more into what that means. But okay, next slide. So then the hearing panel holds a full hearing. Well, first they have a preliminary hearing. If there's more investigation needed, it goes back for more investigation. Otherwise, there's a full hearing, and one or more of the allegations is substantiated, and if so, that goes to the discipline process. If there are only non-substantiated findings, the complainant can appeal. They can also appeal any non-substantiated findings. All right, next slide. So then, if there's an appeal, it could be the officer or the community member that can appeal. So the findings go to an appeal panel, and we'll talk more about what that means later. But either they agree with those original findings that came from the hearings panel, they send it back for further investigation, or they make new findings, and then that discipline process kicks in. Next one. Then the discipline process is that, well, the board votes on what the discipline is going to be. The officer can accept that. If they don't accept it, they have a couple options that beyond the appeal process we already described, which is they can have a due process hearing. We'll talk more about details of that later, but which can result in the discipline being modified or upheld. They can go to the Civil Service Board, which is also described in the city charter, or they can file a grievance, which could lead to an arbitration process. Okay, next.
That is actually the last slide.
That's the last slide. Oh, that's right. Because okay, yeah. Because in the outline that we have, mediation is at the very end, but it's way up at the. I described it very briefly at the beginning, and it doesn't take a lot more details. Right, so I hope that's helpful to people. I mean, I know there's some people that learn better from looking at visuals than words, and I hope that was helpful. I really want to thank Commissioner Aiken for taking the time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So back to you, I think, for the first section.
Yes, before,
Let's-
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chair Dan. I just want to call to the discussion. We're now going to start discussing the draft of PAC areas of agreement of officer accountability, which the subcommittee is tasked with referring to the full commission for its approval. And this will include reviewing the document, which has got some updates to the text based on previous comments, and also include revisiting items flagged for further discussion in advance to the decision to refer. We ask you to follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated, and remember that we are now using a weighted stack in our discussions. Finally, please, before we're looking in your comments, would the co-chairs like to start the revision of the document and the discussion? Thank you. I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Victoria. Again, I'm Charlie Michelle Wesley, co-chair of this phase of the process on officer accountability. And I will start us off with some of the just a couple of the definitions of the many definitions we will describe for easier understanding. One of them is the complainant, which may mean a person who has filed a complaint about misconduct or has been the recipient of alleged misconduct, even if they did not file a complaint. So our first section, A, intake of complaints. A1, where the complainant will be assigned an advocate. A1A, the new board will provide an advocate or complaint navigator for each community member. A1A1, the advocate will be appropriately culturally attuned to the complainant's needs. A1B, civilians can additionally have 2 support people, including an attorney for a total of up to 3 support people. However, the support person cannot be a witness to the incident. A1B1, and this is open for discussion if need be. But if the complainant is an officer who already has the automatic ability to have bargaining unit representative and an attorney, they can also bring a peer officer or community member of their choosing who is not a witness to the incident. This means they may also have as many as 3 support people. Okay. A1C, interviews will be scheduled around civilians' work schedules and can be rescheduled if need be. A1C1, interviews will include accommodations for people with disabilities and interpreters if needed. I will turn it over to co-chair Dan Handelman now for the next section.
Oh, well, before we move on to the next section, we're going to eventually have our facilitator ask for everybody if they agree with it. I do want to highlight that discussion point.
Okay.
And,
in between each time.
Yeah, I think that's a good. Oh, you're breaking up. Oh, now she's in the bedroom.
Yes. What we can do, I don't know, you told me, co-chair Dan, we can see, we can move to the first part. The one that's a discussion, either discuss it or flag it for to go back later. And that way the other parts of that A is already, we move on or is already approved.
Right. So I think, the ones that we have flagged for discussion, if we can do a quick discussion on it, let's see if we can't come to an agreement really quickly, then we'll put it on for a later meeting. So I have another thing I want to add to this, but before I do that, does anybody have questions or concerns about having an officer have the ability to have as many as 3 support people? So again, the community member can have the advocate an attorney, and a support person. That's 3. And the officer can have the bargaining unit representative and attorney and a peer officer or community member if they'd like. That's the plan. We want to discuss that, or are we okay with that?
I can ask the question. If there is a discussion or question or comments about A1B1, please let us know. Otherwise, I can ask the question. Okay. Commissioner Catherine?
Thank you. I support this the way it's written. So in that sense, I don't need to discuss anything. I just wondered, I found it a little confusing to have the heading say advocates when we're really talking, I think, more generally around process as well as advocates. I don't know if that's kind of a friendly amendment that we could maybe say advocates and process, if that would work for people, just so that these last couple of bullets, I think, fit better into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. Then what I will do is I will ask, is there a strong opposition to changing the title from what it was and to the proposed change Commissioner Catherine suggested? Is there a general agreement to the changes that Commissioner Catherine suggested for the title? Okay, then we can move on. For the next, not
Oh, wait.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Facilitator Laura. So I said I had another thing I want to talk about.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
The other thing that's not addressed here is, okay, so we said if the officer is already allowed to have a bargaining unit representative, then they can have these other support people, but we didn't say what happens if the officer doesn't have a bargaining representative. And this is true for everybody from the rank of captain and above. So I just wanted to float it by you. I don't know if we want to agree on something tonight, but my concept idea that I'd like to ask what people think about it. So this would be a new section A1B2 that says that the officer does not have a bargaining, is not part of a bargaining unit. Then they will be assigned an advocate from the pool for the community members. Seems like the easiest way to find a fair way for everybody to have the same number of support people. But I just wanted to see if people have any comments on that.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Is there a comment or question in the new A1B2? Yes, Co-Chair Charlie?
Yes, so I was wondering if they, can have the option to turn that down if they want as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Decline or something, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Decline, okay. Okay, I'm gonna ask for that specific line that was added. And then if they say yes, we can go for the whole section. Yes, staff?
I don't mean to muddy this up. Just quickly, there was a relevant Q&A that I was going to bring up separately after this one in the Q&A for this Zoom meeting, but which may affect this because if it's if the advocates are staff, which is what the question asked about, then this is something that the sort of structure of staffing and whether or not there's a single pool or multiple pools would come up. So it may be helpful to wait on this and resolve them separately. It may be helpful to do the other first. I just wanted to flag that before you ask the question and kick it back to you, Facilitator Laura, to ask it if no one else wants to integrate these two.
Okay. Yes, thank you, staff. Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, I saw that in the Q&A, but that has to do with our next phase when we're deciding what the structure is going to look like. So we're not going to answer that question in this document, but thank you for that comment from the audience. Give it back to you, Facilitator Laura.
Thank you. Then if there is no comment or questions, my question is there a strong opposition to changing all this section A1 Because, oh, A1, B2 already asked. Oh, no, I haven't asked. Okay, sorry. Is there a strong opposition to change to the adding A1, B2? Is there a general agreement to leave this A1, B2 as it is? Okay, thank you. Now, for the whole A1, is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was when we started the discussion, A1? Is there a general agreement to all the changes that happen to A1? Can I see your hands? Okay. Then we can move on for the next. Thank you.
All right, so this is my section. So this is A2, a nice short one. Timelines to file. A2A, the timeline to file a complaint shall be 12 months after the incident. A2A1, the timeline can be extended by the board chair and or director. A2A2, the time limit on filing a complaint will be extended unless a civil case has concluded, until a civil case is concluded, thank you, and or for the term of the involved community members' incarceration. And we wrote a discussion point whether 3, 4, 5 years is a reasonable end limit, because at some point there's going to be no evidence around anymore. Well, let's come back to that discussion point after I read A2, A3, which is other reasons for delayed filing may include, but are not limited to, fear of retaliation, or if an officer who is not previously identified has their identity become known after the 12-month deadline.
Thank you,
So,
Coach Dan. Is there, let me ask if there's discussion or questions, and Commissioner Catherine, please.
So are we saying in A2, A1 that the timeline can be extended by the board chair or director for good cause? I mean, is that effectively what we're saying? And then we're defining good cause in A2, A3?
yes.
So then I would suggest that we put in A2, A1, the timeline can be extended by the board chair or director for good cause. And then in A2, A3, we would say good cause for delayed filing may include. And then people that tends to put some, or I think it's good cause for extending the timeline would be, may include, and then you have those examples of what could constitute good cause.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. Is there any other question? Then I can move or comment. No? Okay, I can, yeah, Coach Dan.
I just want to get back to the question that was flagged from our earlier discussion, which is whether we should say how long it can, is reasonable to delay something because there's a lawsuit or because the person is incarcerated. And we said that because sometimes a federal lawsuit, you have 2 years to even file it, and then sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years to get through the system. And sometimes the attorney may not want to engage with the system before that's over. And then, like I said, if somebody's incarcerated, there may be a point where the officer not even involved, not even employed anymore, or you can't get the evidence anymore. It just doesn't make sense from an investigative standpoint to continue the complaint. So do we want to set an end point deadline of that, or we kick down the road for another discussion some other time?
Commissioner Catherine?
So I think we should say something like, and no later than 5 years, just out of fairness. I feel like it's reasonable to have an outside timeline, and that could actually motivate people to conclude a civil case more quickly if they know that they're up against a hard timeline. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. And I see a couple of people agree with you. Is there additional comments?
I agree.
Okay. Thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. Then I will ask all the ones that have been, can I ask for the whole or need to go one by one? Okay, I need to go by one. Okay, let's review the whole. I can do the whole. Okay, let me ask the question. Is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was to all the proposed changes? The full good cause to a maximum of 5 years, good cause for extending the timeline. Is there a strong opposition? Is there a general agreement to change it, making all the changes as it looks right now, especially the green font to A2? Okay, I see everybody agrees. Thank you. We can go, we can move on.
Before I turn back to my co-chair, I should mention that the stuff that you see highlighted in colors in between these sections is from the research phase, and it's stuff that we had in our preliminary discussions that led to this outline. We're not discussing it tonight, but it's there so that if people need to refer to it, they can look at it. It's also for transparency for the public. So just so you know, that's what we're skipping over. Thanks.
Thank you, Co-Chair, for the explanation.
Right.
Okay. We can go to the next one.
Okay, A3. Who can file? A3A, anyone who experiences or witnesses alleged misconduct can file a complaint. The right to complain is absolute and unconditional. A3A1, parents or guardians should be able to file complaints on behalf of minors up to the age of 18. Youth can file on their own complaints beginning at age 15, with that age based on healthcare laws. A3A2, the complainant pool is inclusive regardless of age, immigration status, residence, criminal record, or language used. Incarcerated people can file complaints. A3A3, another one we could possibly discuss. Anonymous complaints will be accepted, but may be prioritized depending on the nature and severity of allegations and for more minor complaints, the board's workload, such as the board's workload. A3A4, complaints involving community members can be filed by third parties, individuals, or organizations. A3B, police officers with city police or with other agencies can file complaints against Portland police officers. A3C, no member of the community or the police bureau shall face retaliation, intimidation, coercion, adverse action for reporting misconduct or cooperating with a misconduct investigation.
Thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. Let me ask the question, especially for the A3. Is there any discussion, questions in general, or suggested change on the language of A3? Commissioner Catherine?
So I think that we might be trying to say maybe deprioritized, I think is the intention there. I was a part of those discussions, and I think that's what we were talking about. That we might want to explicitly allow the board to not, to put other complaints that have a complainant ahead of them. So that's, I guess I think that might clarify it.
Thank you. Co-Chair Dan?
Well, I think if you read the whole sentence, though, that becomes confusing because it says for more minor complaints, it can be for the board's workload. So I think that they would prioritize them if they are very severe in nature, I think was the intent, but maybe there's another way to say that more clearly.
And also will ask
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Commissioners Sima and Christian and Debbie, they have any suggestions or questions? Commissioner Christian?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I actually had a note on this one, but I was reading my note and it doesn't make sense to me now. So I'm trying to figure out what, because I think I had the same thought where I was a little bit confused by the language. I had written will to and, but I think maybe I meant may and may, wait, hold on, will be, that's not, I don't think that, but that doesn't make sense, that the note that I have. So I think what I meant was, I'm just gonna say will be accepted. And I think I meant like and will be prioritized depending on the nature and severity of the violations. I'm wondering if maybe the but may be is making it a little bit unclear. I hopefully that, I don't know, does that make sense to anyone? I'm not sure if that helps, but that's just what I had in my note. I'm trying to decode my past note taking. Apologies.
I think that's a better approach than what I had suggested, given Dan's clarification.
Thank you, Commissioner Christian.
So I withdraw my suggestion.
Okay. Yes. Is there a additional? Yes, Commissioner Catherine?
So my other clarification is on A3C, where I think we might want to say any adverse action for filing a complaint, reporting misconduct, or cooperating, because this is all around filing complaints. So I think that that would be more inclusive and maybe get to what we're talking about here. And then while I have the floor, I had a question about the first sentence, A3A. Are we saying the right to complain or the right to file a complaint? I wasn't quite sure what that, when we said the right to complain is absolute, or is it the right to file a complaint? I wasn't quite sure what that means. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, that reminds me of a discussion I had with the assistant chief once when I said, "How are things going?" And he said, "I can't complain." I said, "I can, and I often do." He said, "Know that, Dan. No, you're not. You're supposed to think that's funny. You're not supposed to say I know that." Anyway, yes, I agree with that. That's a good suggestion. I also agree with the other one. It should say filing a complaint in A3C, I think. And there's another little language thing that I noticed as being read out. Youth can file complaints on their own beginning at age 15 instead of on their own complaints. I was kind of just probably a typographical issue. That's all the suggestions I have, and I agree with the other recommendations.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. If there are no more suggestions, I can review, I can ask the questions. Is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was A3, the whole A3, as to what was proposed? Okay, is there a general agreement to changing from what it was to what is proposed in green font? Okay, thank you. We can go to the next one.
Sorry, I do have one clarifying question.
Sure. Go ahead, Commissioner Simab, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, it's okay. Yeah, I was wondering if I needed to ask it or not. I don't know why, but with A3C, you know, are we empowered to advocate for protocol if if there is retaliation? I mean, I know that we're saying that no member of the community or police bureau shall face retaliation, but what happens if there is? Is this a question we should ask ourselves in this process or down the road?
Commissioner, Co-Chair Dan? Thank you, Commissioner Sima.
So I just, just to be really clear, what we're doing is we're contemplating what's going to be written for the board for their rules hopefully in city code. But the rules that govern what the police officers do or what their punishment will be if they retaliate, that's a different thing. That's the new board will have the ability to weigh in on those rules. But that's not something that if it's envisioned in the charter that the board's going to do, is to set policy. That would be a different kind of a body, usually called a police commission in most other cities. So this language actually comes directly out of the, and oh, I also forgot to say that along the side, there's some comments that you might be able to see or not, that says City Code 3.21.1, blah, blah. So that the original language came from the existing city code around this. So this is already in place and we just wanted to mirror that.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Is that okay, Commissioner Sima? Perfect. And now then my last question on A3 is, can we move on? Yeah, thank you. We can move on.
I think it's my turn.
Yeah.
A4, ways to file complaints. A4A, the complaint process is inclusive and offers multiple methods and accommodations to ensure access. Oh, and by the way, some of these things, they're not flagged for discussion because like that came right out of the research phase, and the whole commission already agreed to that. All right, A4A1, filing will be offered in person or by mail, phone, email, online, texting, or by other common technological means of communication. Collect calls will be accepted. A4A2, translation for documents and for verbal communication shall be offered with appropriate interpretation to be inclusive of non-English speakers and people with disabilities. It says discuss the language of this item. If people have a better way to phrase that. Okay, A4A3, the complainant shall be asked to state their preferred method of communication at the beginning of the process. A4AB, this is a capital discussion, which means we thought there'd be some discussion around this for sure. Complaints called into members of the police bureau, including internal affairs, or to the city's information lines, such as 311, shall be directed to the board's staff. Actually, it's not as controversial as it sounded at first. Okay, in my opinion. A4C, the board's offices shall be open to accept complaints for longer hours than Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., including early mornings, weekend times, and evenings. We'll have a discussion in a minute. A4D, the Bureau shall inform the board immediately upon their knowledge that a member has engaged in conduct that may be subject to criminal and/or administrative investigation, and that also is pulled from current code. And A4E, the board shall work with staff to be sure complaint forms are widely available. And that actually also comes from city code, but I didn't flag it. Okay, so discussion, do people have better language? Oh, we're going to turn it back to our facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. And I know there is a couple of discussion points, but I will ask, is there a question, a discussion, or a better way to A4, A2 to discuss the language? Yes, staff?
I just wanted to flag that the way that the language around A4, A2, that content area has been used earlier by the PAC has been to be inclusive of speakers for whom, or people for whom English is not their first language, as there may be folks who speak English but don't necessarily might still benefit from those sorts of services, translation and interpretation.
Thank you, staff. And yeah, that's more inclusive. That way it doesn't matter if person that speaks some way English, but it feels more comfortable with, yeah, because English is not their first language. Yeah. Is that Commissioner Dan, Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, so I actually should have done this research before, but the other half of that about people with disabilities, you know, the language that we use around people with disabilities has evolved over the years, and I just checked on the state's website, and the county agencies that handle claims for people with disabilities refers to people with disabilities. So that's currently used language nomenclature in the state of Oregon. But if people have a better suggestion, now's the time to say it, or we can just pass it on for the full commission to fix that up later.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Are there any? Yes, Co-Chair Charlie?
So with the way staff explained it, then that sounds like to me, though, it leaves out people who do not have a second language. They only speak some other language and no English. Am I hearing that wrong or?
Oh, I just want to, I thought that the staff was typing in their suggestion there. Yeah, no, I think that that language that came from our commission should be inserted there. I think that would be great.
Yeah,
Thank you. Commissioner Debbie?
Could you say instead is not their preferred language?
Yes, Commissioner Co-Chair Charlie?
oh, do I still have my hand up? Sorry.
Thank you.
Although that really sounds awkward to me. I'll just say that. I don't know what else to say.
Okay, thank you. Is there additional suggestions for the language on A4, A2? Okay, what about A4B? Yes, Commissioner Debbie?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea for all the complaints to be funneled through the new agency to the new board.
And would you like to leave it like it is, or do you have a suggestion and how it should be?
I think that sounds fine the way it is.
Thank you. Any other suggestions or comments? No? Okay. Is there more discussion? I can ask the questions. Is there a strong opposition to changing A4 to what it was to these proposed changes reflected on green font? Is there a general agreement to changing A4 to what it is to what it has been proposed in green font? Oh, yes, Co-Chair Charlie?
Back to the, it's not I'm still troubled by the preferred first language, like there's more than one first language.
No, I had to enlarge it. The first is actually crossed out.
Oh,
The
good.
Preferred.
Okay, thank you.
So you can go to the view options on your screen. You can enlarge it to 100%, and then you can see that that's crossed out.
Oh, very good. Thanks. I did not see that.
Thank you. Then I will thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. Is there a general agreement to changing from as it was A4 to a proposed, use the proposed changes reflected on green font? Okay. Thank you. Can we move on to the next one? Okay. What we're gonna do A5 and then we're gonna take a short break. Pass it to the co-chairs.
Chair Michelle Wesley, your internet's cutting in and out. Are you able to do this? I know it's a very long section, so you're trying to get out of it.
Wait,
Are you, can you speak so we can hear you?
can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Good.
Okay, so it's my turn?
Why, yes, it is.
Okay. A5, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I got lost. All
It's okay.
right. A5, providing information to complainants. Do I sound okay?
You sound great.
Okay. So this is for providing information to officers, see investigations. That's in the parentheses on the side of that. So A5A, and this is also a large discuss. During intake, the complainant shall be informed of any obligations the board may have to report something that is stated to them as part of a complaint. It is important that the board not turn over any admission of civil violations, criminal conduct, or criminal intent unless there is an imminent threat of harm to the complainant or others. A5A1, and this is a little discussed. During intake, staff shall not judge the complainant or their allegations, even if they do not think the complaint is true. A5A2, this is a large discuss, but not bolded. Anyway, however, if the staff conducting intake has some kind of bias or conflict regarding the complainant or nature of the allegations, they should reveal that bias. If possible, another staff member should complete the intake. Otherwise, the person with the conflict should hand the case off after intake. A5B, complainant shall receive records of their complaint, including A5B1, confirmation of the receipt, of the complaint, including a summary of the allegations. A5B2, literature about the board and its process, including explanation of confidentiality issues. A5B3, as appropriate, a medical release form for records related to the complaint. A5B4, notice of the investigation cannot be completed in the ordinary timeline. A5B5, notification of completion of the investigation in a final report. And A5B6, a survey about their experience with the complaint system. And then A5C, information for the complaint about the complaint shall be made available online. A5D, this is a small discuss. The complainant should have access to as much information about the complaint as, oh, I can't see this word, sorry. My staple is in the way. As legally possible, even if some material has to be redacted. And then A5D1, the advocate, as described in A1, shall have access to all available records in order to best advise the complainant, even information the complainant or their community representatives are not legally authorized to access. Such materials may also be redacted to comply with privacy laws. A5E, the complainant shall not incur cost for access to information about their complaint. A5F, communication shall not be made by postcard or other means of written communication that jeopardizes privacy.
Thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. And we have several items to discuss, starting with A5A, and then A5D, and A5A2 as well, and A5A1. Is there questions, comments, or suggestions about any of these topics? Co-Chair Dan?
So just for clarification, this suggestion came from a commissioner, and we had a lot of discussion about it in our work sessions, but it just, you know, I think that people will be reluctant to file a complaint if they think that, if they say, and a lawyer will be reluctant to let their client speak to, if they say, yeah, well, I was robbing this liquor store and the police officer punched me in the face before I did anything that would, you know, justify that. They don't want to admit to a crime and then have that admission of a crime be turned over to the police. That's a, you know, a broad explanation of the kind of thing that, you know, this is trying to cover.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Commissioner Christian or Commissioner Sima or Commissioner Debbie? Any suggestions or questions? Yes, staff?
I had a question on this, just because of the way that the first sentence is formulated. Is there an obligation that the members found to the board to turn over any admission of civil violations, et cetera? Like, is that why it's formulated that way, or is there a particular obligation that was found?
Yes, Commissioner Dan?
Well, we don't know what has happened when people, you know, 90% of the investigations or more that have happened under the current system since IPR started have happened through internal affairs, which is part of the police bureau. And we don't know whether those things have been turned over, whether or not they've been turned over. We want to make sure the new board doesn't do that. So this is just, you know, sort of a preemptive thing to make sure that even if that is the policy now, that it should not happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Christian?
Thank you. Sorry. I don't really have any suggestions on how to change this. I think it's a good idea. And to me, it makes sense. It sounds good, but I will say that and see if that makes anyone think of anything.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Christian. Commissioner Catherine and then Commissioner Debbie.
So I think we might, I guess I'm confused about the complaint itself is not confidential in the sense that I'm understanding that in the process, the complaint will be shared with the officer against whom it's lodged. Is that correct? I guess I'm asking Dan or Charlie, who have the broadest understanding of what the recommendations are. I understood that that the complaint would be shared with the officer who is being complained about as part of the due process rights here. So, I mean, assuming that premise is correct, then what we're really talking about is the intake aspects of the intake interview would be considered confidential vis-a-vis the police. Is that right?
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. And I will pass it to Co-Chair Ran before, that way he can answer the question. You are on mute, Co-Chair.
Sorry, yes, the last question you asked, Commissioner McDowell, is correct. That means that part of the interview that could incriminate the complainant would not be turned over to the police. So that maybe we need to make that very clear.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Commissioner Debbie?
I wonder if this is something we should double check with the city attorney about at some point. Just because, you know, I was thinking about how, like, in child abuse cases and stuff like that, there's a mandatory reporting requirement. And I have no idea if that could ever come into play in one of these situations, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that maybe we should get some advice on this. I think it's a good idea, but I just don't know if there's some little loopholes we need to worry about.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Co-Chair Dan?
Posted some language in the chat. I didn't mean to keep my hand up.
Okay. Should we adapt what you put in the chat?
Yeah, I would like to add that to the end of that paragraph. So it would say that part of the complaint which could incriminate the complainant will be considered confidential.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything else we can go to A5, A1 for discussing?
Well, I guess I should raise my hand, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Okay, I guess I'm agreeing that maybe needs some more work. And I guess I'm agreeing with what we're trying to get at there, but I think it raises some questions about what would be considered confidential, what is considered public record, and what would be disclosed to the officer. And I guess maybe that will become clear as we go through the document, and we could circle back and clarify what we're really talking about here. But I feel like it's a little bit vague in terms of what it raises those questions for me. And I guess I would like to maybe put a flag on this one, that we circle back and try to clarify the language once we have a really clear idea in our minds about the protocols around confidentiality and public notice and disclosure to the officer.
Thank you, Commissioner. We will put a note to come back to A5A. What about A5A1? Yes, Commissioner Charlie?
Yes, I was, but this brings up a question for me. Shall not judge the complainant. I mean, who's going to make that determination, I guess, is my question. I remember when we were doing this, and I didn't think to ask at that time, but I'd like to ask my co-chair, Handelman.
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. And maybe Commissioner Sima has a suggestion.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was actually on similar lines with Commissioner Michelle Wesley. Also, even just on the wordplay in itself, shall not judge the complaint or their allegations, even if they do not think the complaint is true. I think that's, I think killing the end of that and kind of having a wordplay, shall not judge the complaint on its truth or merits, or something along those lines, probably would feel better word-wise, but yeah, but I do also second Commissioner Michelle Wesley.
Thank you. And I will pass it to Co-Chair Dan.
Yeah, I think that maybe the word judge should be, express opinions about. That would be better, more explanatory. Does that make sense? Staff shall not express opinions about the complainant or their allegations or on the shall express opinion about the complainant or on the truth or merit of their allegations. I think would read better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. And I will pass it to staff.
Yeah, I was actually going to float that exact formulation of wording that Co-Chair Dan just said, because it also the staff of this entity will have their own rights to freedom of thought and expression, and so you're getting out of the question of what they're thinking that way and getting into the question of what they're doing to bias the investigation, which is certainly something that the policy could regulate. So yeah, happy to not have to explain that, because Commissioner Dan just did.
Yeah, thank you, staff. Okay, then we can go to discuss A5, A2. Do you have suggestions about how it should be explained or change it? Yes, Co-Chair Dan?
I guess I should say, it's okay. If you don't have any suggestions, if you think it's okay, that's all right too. I mean, that would be great. Then we can go to the next thing.
Yes. Let me see if there is not. Okay, staff?
Yeah, there's a relevant Q&A here that may apply to A5A1 and or A5A2, or may apply to an earlier section in the Zoom Q&A. And it essentially is well, I won't say essentially, can an individual who has previously filed several meritless complaints keep on filing a limitless amount of complaints?
Co-Chair Dan?
There's a story that's called The Boy Who Cried Wolf. And I personally do not want to create a system where just because somebody's made complaints that didn't turn out to be, found out of policy in the past, that they don't get listened to in the future. So I appreciate the question. And again, I think that maybe we can consider questions at the, as we go along, if they're urgent and relevant, but I'd rather not put a limit on how many times a person can file a complaint right now. And that's another thing that, there's going to be things that the board and their staff can make rules about later. But I think that these sections that we're discussing should guide that decision making.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Okay, yes, Co-Chair Dan is correct. If there's no suggestions or discussions, we can leave it as it is. We understand A5A is gonna be flagged by discussion later, but I can ask the questions about the rest of A5, A1, the rest of A5. Is there a strong opposition to changing A5 from A5 and A1 to the proposed changes? Is there a general agreement to change and use the suggestions to A5, A1, and on? Yes, okay, thank you. Can we move on and just go back to A5, A1? Okay. Oh, we have, sorry. We have A5D for discuss, and I didn't see it. We need to go back and see if there's any discussion question, otherwise it will be.
Should have access to as much information as legally possible, even if someone else.
Yeah, everything is starting from A5, B6, we haven't reviewed. It was read by the co-chair, but is there any questions or discussion items, especially in A5B? Is there no discussions? We can leave it as it is. Okay. Let me ask then the question from A5, B6 and A5 to A5, B6 to A5F. Is there a strong opposition to leave? No. Is there a general agreement to leave A5, B6 to A5F? Okay, can we move on? Okay, there is 7:49. Let's take a 6 minutes break and come back at 7:55. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move to A6, please.
Okay, it's my turn. I'm ready whenever you are, staff. Okay. Oh, this is a long one. Types of conduct and complaints the new agency will investigate and determine outcomes. So a lot of the reason this is long is because it's like a long list of specific kinds of allegations. So it's not, hopefully it won't take us all evening. All right, A6A. The board shall investigate certain police actions, including but not limited to A6A1, all deaths in custody. And we wrote as parenthetical thought we'll come back to, including effective and constructive custody. And I'll explain what that means when we come back to it. And uses of deadly force. A6A2, all complaints of force that result in injury, discrimination against a protected class, violations of state, federal, or federal or state constitutional rights. Sorry, I was thinking in my mind that this section comes directly from the charter, except for that parenthetical thought. So just so you know. Okay, A6B, and I should have flagged that for a footnote. A6B, the board shall also investigate allegations of, okay, here comes the big list. A6B1, dishonesty and untruthfulness, including perjury. A6B2, false reports and concealing evidence. A6B3, sexual assault, sexual misconduct, or sexual harassment. A6B4, domestic violence. A6B5, unlawful search or arrest. A6B6, neglect of duty. A6B7, period, discourtesy, including use of profanity. A6B8, improper discharge of firearm. A6B9, criminal conduct, including off-duty criminal conduct. And just as a reminder that this is the administrative investigation into that criminal conduct, not the criminal investigation. A6B10, improper or illegal act, omission, or decision that directly affects a person or property. A6B11, violation of orders which affect a community member. A6B12, harassment. A6B13, intimidation. A6B14, forced use of protest. A6B15, abuse of authority, such as use of police credentials in a personal dispute. A6B16, officer failure to identify. A6B17, theft of money. A6B18, corruption. A6B19, allegations of affiliation of white supremacist groups. A6B20, cases of substantial public interest. And A6B21, where data shows a pattern of inappropriate policies. Data is a plural now, I should say data show. Okay. A6C, the board may also investigate. May. So this is those were the shalls and this is the may. A6C1, any alleged misconduct directly affecting the public, including work-related allegations such as tardiness if they affect a community member. A6C2, other cases which do not originate from a complaint at the discretion of the board. And I will pause there also to interrupt myself that throughout this thing, when we're saying the board, it's probably in our next phase where we're talking about the structure that anything that is supposed to be done by the community members, they can delegate to the staff, you know, at their discretion. There may be things that we don't want them to do that, but not, it's maybe that the staff has that authority to figure out this kind of case. Okay. A6D, this is another discussion point, another separate thought. If the involved officer is within their 18-month probationary period and is fired by the Bureau, the board shall complete the investigation. and I can explain when we get to that why we wrote that in there. A6E, when the only officers involved are from another jurisdiction, the board shall ask permission from the complainant to forward their complaint to the proper investigating authority. And I think we had that discussion at the last meeting. A6F, for a full discussion, if a complainant asks the board not to, oh, I see. If a complainant asks the board not to investigate a case that falls under the board's mandate in the charter, the board shall weigh the interests of community concerns and the need for justice against the wishes of the complainant and or their attorney if there is one. Okay, so that is the gist of A6. I don't know where we want to start. I guess we should start with the first discussion point, facilitator Laura.
Yes, thank you. And the first discussion point is A6D. If we have any suggestions or questions about A6D.
I have two things.
Go ahead, Co-Chair Dan.
Well, there's part of A6A1 that I was going to discuss, but while we're here, let's just finish this up. So I was going to explain this. This comes from existing code that a police review board can continue a case if an officer gets fired within their 18-month probationary period, and the logic behind that for both the existing system and what we discussed in the work sessions is that if that person is fired and they committed some kind of misconduct within their first 18 months and then they go to apply somewhere else, we want to be able to finish the investigation to make sure that it's adjudicated thoroughly and it's not just based off an allegation, that there's proof one way or the other about whether misconduct occurred. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any suggestions, questions? No, we can pass to the next discuss item. Oh yes, A6A1.
I think Commissioner McDowell has her hand up.
Okay, Commissioner Catherine.
Yeah, so I guess can someone remind me, I was thinking that that we had in here that the board should complete the investigation if an officer left. Am I wrong about that? I thought we had decided somewhere along the way that if an officer left mid-investigation, left the police bureau mid-investigation, the board would complete the investigation. So have we decided to do a more limited version of that and only do that if the officer is within their 18-month probationary period and fired?
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, this may be redundant, but I don't know. I think probationary officers are dealt with differently from regular officers. So we put this, we pulled this out from existing code and put it in here. But I think you're right. I think it is elsewhere that it says that the case will be investigated fully, even if the officer leaves. So it may be redundant. That can be worked out later. But for the time being, this is in this section. So.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Is there any additional discussion? Then we can go to A1-6, I think it was the first discussion. A6A1.
Right. So, as I said, the other language here is directly from the charter. There was a case that just went before the police. Oh, I forgot to send you all the analysis Portland Cop Watch did of the latest police review board report. I should do that. Maybe I'll put it in the chat if I remember later. But anyway, there's a case where a man was in a car and the police surrounded him and kind of boxed him in with their cars. But boxing in is a very specific thing. They didn't exactly do that, but they surrounded him so he couldn't really drive away. And they ended up like throwing tear gas or pepper spray into the car, and the person took their own life with the firearm that they had. So the officers didn't kill them. They didn't die in custody in physical custody because the person wasn't arrested. They were still in their own car. But this is called in law effective or constructive custody. So I guess the question, and the police review board suggested that they not have to look at those cases in the future. I think, personally, I'll say my opinion here, that it should be investigated in case the police tear gas caused the person's death, or if the actions that they did provoked the person to use that firearm. So I disagree with what the police review board is trying to do getting out of these cases. So I would suggest the inclusion of this, but I'll await your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Then if there are no additional questions or comment, we can move on to the last discussed item. That's A6F. Is there a question? I don't know, Commissioner Christian or Sima? Questions or suggestions? Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, then can we, since we didn't, I forgot, do we make changes? No? No, then can we move on to the, yes, go ahead, Co-Chair.
Oh, sorry. I just want to, I'm asking for the subcommittee to approve of that change to the A1, A6, A1, to add effective and constructive custody to that, because that language is not in the charter, and I'd like to add that. Is that okay?
Okay. I can ask the question, is there a strong opposition to include that language that was suggested in A6, A1 plus was the only change? I'm sorry. Is there a strong opposition to include the language in A6, A1? Is there a general agreement to add that language? Okay, thank you. Can we move on? Okay, let's move to A7.
Okay, that would be me. A7, complaints not involving community members. A7A, internal affairs should still exist for investigations into minor protocol violations that do not impact the community. A7A1, for example, taking home a police car for personal use would not be investigated by the board unless that vehicle then runs into another car or person. A7B, officers who file complaints against other officers should have the ability to ask the board to investigate to ensure an impartial review. A7B1, however, when Bureau supervisors generate complaints about poor member performance or other work rule violations, reasonable unit managers are responsible for intake and investigations.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair. Charlie, Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, it says responsible unit. I know it's hard to read because of the italics. And I put that in italics because I was gonna try to get the definition from the Bureau what that means. It's a kind of term that we use in Portland for like a supervisor who's above the level of a sergeant. I don't have a better definition than that off the top of my head, but again, we pulled this language from the existing code. I also want to say that in A7A, I would like to propose cutting the words minor and protocol. So internal affairs should still exist for investigations into violations that do not impact the community. That's my suggestion.
Sorry, I think you might be muted, Victoria.
Oh,
I
thank
thought
you.
it was a problem on my end.
I was
Yeah.
asking all my questions. Go ahead, Commissioner Christian.
Thank you. The dance, Co-Chair Handelman's suggestion sounds good to me. I had a quick, it might be a moot addition, but I'm wondering if on A7, A1, it might be good to add an additional example to the unless the vehicle runs into another car or person, like or like is used for intimidation or something like that. That may be apparent in the language, in the fact that it's, you know, if it affects a community member basically, but I don't know if having another example that is not as physical could be, you know, useful in there. That's my only thought. Yeah, people can take it or leave it.
Thank you. That's, I think it's a very good idea. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, since I was on mute and you asked something great, I will ask the question again. Is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was in to the proposed changes? Is there a general agreement to changing from what it was and to have the proposed changes? Okay. Can we move on then to the next? Thank you.
Okay, this is my section. I see staff's hand is up. I'm not sure why.
Staff?
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick reference that under the PAC agenda and scope, the internal affairs question of its existence or not is under the fifth phase. That is something that may come up in the full commission, stuff flagging this for the group again. That specific may not be helpful to go into here, but I'll scroll down just a moment.
Okay.
Well,
Thank-
I was actually going to mention that that's a very big decision. That was one of the three big decisions I said that you know we had on our plate today about the advocates, the internal affairs, and the police review board existing or not. But I think that what we have is a consensus from this subcommittee that that's what should happen. So we'll pass that to the full commission, and you know there's no reason that we have to hold off on that because this has to do with the workflow of complaints, and I think that's what we're dealing with. And I'd like to, you know, again, I think you're correct to say that it could be discussed at the full commission either now or in the next phase. So let's go on to A8.
Commissioner Co-Chair Charlie has, please go ahead, Co-Chair Charlie.
I just wanted to go back and potentially answer Christian's question about using the car to intimidate. So back in section A6B15, I think that covers it, right? Abuse of authority, such as use of police credentials in a personal dispute. Yeah. If they use their car, the car in a way to abuse their authority, would it not follow under that?
Thank you, Co-Chair. And Co-Chair Dan?
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with you, Co-Chair Michelle Wesley, but I think we're just trying to give an example of what could seem like an officer only doing something that doesn't involve a community member, but then it does. So I don't really have a problem with including that language here. I understand what you're saying, though, and I agree with it.
Then Commissioner Catherine?
So I'm not sure if this addresses the concern that staff raised, whether if I'm not advocating that we should do this, but we could do this where we could just say internal affairs should, you know, investigate violations that do not impact the community. So we're not just taking out the should still exist language, and we would just state what basically we're stating what the board should do and what if internal affairs should do without the should still exist statement. I'm not sure if that's required, but maybe that addresses the sensitivity that staff just flagged.
Thank you. Okay, I can ask the question again if there is not additional suggestions. No, okay. Is there a strong opposition to change from what it was to the proposed changes in number A7A? No. Is there a general agreement to support to change from what it was to the new changes? Okay, thank you. Can we move on to A8? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is going to be mine. So A8 is preliminary investigations. A8A says when the board receives a complaint involving a bureau member, the staff shall A8A1 assign a case number. A8A2 gather information about the complaint through an intake interview. A8A3 make a decision about whether the case should be investigated, suggested for mediation, addressed by some other means, or dismissed. A8A4, if appropriate for investigation, identify the complainant's allegations, and A8A5, communicate to the complainant summarizing the complaint and the case handling decision. See section A5B. A8AB, if the complainant expresses an interest in resolving the complaint informally through discussion with the officer's supervisor, the board shall determine whether such resolution is appropriate. Once approved, a case can be resolved this way without formal investigation. And I want to talk about that and then how that's referenced in 8A83. So that was, Director Caldwell talked to us a couple of weeks ago and said that he was surprised how many times people call up and say, I don't want the officer investigated, I don't need them to be disciplined, I just want to talk to the supervisor. Okay, that's reasonable. We're trying to accommodate community concerns, and if that's what the community member wants to do, that's great. But the board or their delegates or people they delegate the information to should have the authority to decide whether or not that's appropriate. I'm not sure where we're going here. I'm having a hard time following what is on the screen because it disappeared. I wonder if there's a way to freeze our screen while staff while you're scrolling. I don't know if that works. Anyway, so that's what this. So this informal resolution right now. There's this thing that was described to us. It's called a supervisory investigation, and that has formal findings. But this is just more of a thing where the supervisor says, "Hey, you know what? This person called up. What you did was not appropriate, and I want you to change your behavior in the future." And this is what the community's concerns were. And that's addressed in A8A3 as addressed by some other means, but didn't want to be exclusive and say that the only other way to resolve it is by letting the supervisor talk to the officer.
Thank you, Coach Jordan. I will pass it to Commissioner Catherine.
Thank you. So I think that if I'm recalling the flow charts that we looked at the beginning referred to the term preliminary investigation. So it seems important to pick that up here. And I see that we have it in the heading, but I think maybe in A8, A2, we should say something like conduct a preliminary investigation by including gathering information from the complaint through an intake interview, and then make a decision about whether the complaint should be investigated, that blah, blah. Because I think we haven't really said in these sub-bullets where the preliminary investigation occurs before the decision about conducting a full investigation, referring to mediation, or dismissing. Do people follow that concern? Yeah. Okay, that's my comment. And then I would say going, in the next, just skipping down, and I'll just say it now to be efficient. In A9A, we say after an initial investigation. I think we would want to say after a preliminary investigation, again, using that same language.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. Okay, is there any other discussion for A8? 8? No, okay, let me ask the question. Is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was to the new proposed change? Is there a general agreement to changing from what it was to the new proposed change reflected on green font? Good, can we move on?
Both co-chairs, Charlie, turned to lead, and also that she has her hand raised.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, my laptop's dying. I have to go get the charger, and I hope it doesn't die while I'm gone. Be right back.
Would you like me to run this section then?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do that. Thank you for letting us know. All right, so A9, and you know what? We were trying to capitalize all these subheadings, so capital D dismissals, if you don't mind, staff. So A9A, after a preliminary investigation, the board may dismiss the case. And again, the board could be just referring to the staff. A9A1, if the case is dismissed, the board will provide notification to the complainant. A9A2, the board will also notify the involved officers and the commanding officer once the appeal deadline has passed the appeal section. A9B, the board may dismiss a complaint for the following reasons. Okay, there's another list, folks. A9A1, I think, no, A9B1. The complaint is only related to criminal charges against the complainant and does not allege misconduct. And that's for discussion. I'll explain that when we get back to it. A9B2, the complainant delayed too long in filing the complaint to justify initiating an investigation. See timelines to file. A9B3, even if all aspects of the complaint were true, no act of misconduct would have occurred. A9B4, another discussion point, if the complaint is trivial, frivolous, or not made in good faith. A9B5, the complainant withdraws the complaint or fails to complete necessary steps to continue with the complaint. It may benefit the community to finish the investigation. However, lack of cooperation and lack of consent from a complainant may make it impossible or inappropriate to complete the investigation. A9B6, lack of jurisdiction. See A6E, where we explain what that has to be discussed with the complainant before it's turned over to the other jurisdiction. Sorry, I'm going so fast. I talk fast sometimes. And A9B7, for the duration of the U.S. Department of Justice agreement, cases alleging excessive force shall only be dismissed when there's clear and convincing evidence that the allegation has no basis in fact. All right, so before we go to those discussion points, facilitator Lara, there's a little flag on the side of that one on A9B7. Can you scroll up for that? Thanks. It says proposal that all force allegations should be, so you know, we think, or those of us that worked on this in a work session, that all force allegations should be investigated depending on the information that we get from IPR, DOJ, or the compliance officer. And why we said that is that we don't know how you have clear and convincing evidence to dismiss a case when you haven't done a full investigation, right? But there may be an explanation for that we didn't hear from IPR or the DOJ or when we haven't talked to the compliance officer. And I read the compliance officer's report. I still don't really have an idea of what this means. They talk about cases where the IPR dismisses them because there's clear and convincing evidence, but they don't really explain what the clear and convincing evidence was. That's something we probably have to hold off on making a suggestion to change that since it's in the DOJ agreement. But and we probably need more research to do anything to it. Hope that do people understand that caveat? The clear and convincing evidence issue. Is that okay? Am I making sense?
Thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Okay, well, let's go and review the discuss items. The first one is A9B1. Is there suggestions or questions? Yes, Commissioner Dan?
I just want to explain this. So a lot of times a complaint comes in and the person says the officer gave me a speeding ticket and I wasn't speeding. And they're not saying it was because of their race. They're not saying that it was because of the way their car looked. They're just saying that they thought the officer was wrong. That's something that can go through a court. It's not, there's no misconduct being alleged. So that's what this proposal is about. And all these subsections, one way or another, came from the existing code, but the one that this is reflecting said that there's another means for the person to resolve their complaint. And I think that's just too vague. I think this is more specific. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Additional comments, questions? Can we move on for the next discussed item?
I'm sorry. I do have one more thing.
Sure.
It should be criminal charges or alleged violations against the complainant, because there's something like a traffic ticket isn't necessarily a criminal charge. Thanks.
Can we move to the next item to discuss? Yes, okay. A9B4.
All right, so if you can see the margin here, it says, we suggest to come up with better, less subjective language than this. This is also directly from the existing code. And, again, kind of referring back to that comment that the community member made, it could be that something is not, within the realm of something that might have actually happened, but I think there's got to be a nicer way to phrase it than this, and not let it be up to the staff to arbitrarily say this is trivial or frivolous or not made in good faith. That they're, so if people have suggestions for better language, this is the time to throw it in there, or we can kick it to the full commission for that.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Are there, yes, Commissioner Catherine?
I wonder if we could tie it to the previous standard. So it'd be, even if all aspects of the complaint were true, no act of misconduct would have occurred, or the complaint is appears trivial, frivolous, or not made in good faith. So something so that I don't know, that's what I wondered, if that would make it well, I guess I think as I talk that through, that's probably not a good standard, because most likely if it's frivolous, then they would have just made some stuff up. So I take that back, and I wonder, maybe then you could just say something that would apply an objective, a reasonableness standard, so that it's not a subjective, so that it would be trivial, frivolous, or objectively not made in good faith, or something like that. So we're just putting the word objectively in there. That's the best I can come up with.
Thank you. Let me see, the staff got the note. Okay, thank you. And I will pass it to Co-Chair Charlie.
Was there language we used in that last one that seemed better when we talked about judging? Or could we use it at maybe? Well, there doesn't seem to be a good enough word. Every time I think of one, I'm like, no, like inconsequential or insignificant, or I don't know, or just maybe not made in good faith. I don't know. I'm with you, Catherine. I
wonder if we could say something like applying an objective standard, the complaint appears trivial, frivolous, or not made in good faith, something like that, because then so take objectively out of the then at least, and when you say that, applying an objective standard, you're, that brings in kind of a reasonableness, it's what would a reasonable person think? A reasonable person would think that this complaint is trivial, frivolous, or not made in good faith. So that's, the objective standard brings in a reasonableness standard that it works to get away from a subjective judgment.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. Co-chair Dan?
I want to support that addition from Commissioner McDowell. And I thought I too, co-chair Michelle Wesley, was thinking about the non-judgmental line that we worked on before. And I was trying to think of, I can't think of an example of a case I've actually heard, but I'm just thinking, like, if somebody complains that the officer handed them a business card, but there was a typo on it, that just sort of seems like something that's not necessarily misconduct, you know what I mean? So that's the kind of thing that I would consider trivial or frivolous. But they should fix the typo. So I think that maybe we might want to add here at the top of A9B, the board may dismiss a complaint for the following reasons, but may wish to pull potential policy issues from complaints. Yeah, recommendations. Yeah, something like that.
Thank you, co-chair Dan and the staff. And let me see, is there any additional suggestions? Okay, I'm gonna ask the question, is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was to the new proposed changes? Is there a general agreement to changing from what it was to the new proposed changes? Can we move on? Okay, thank you.
To clarify, are you saying move on to the next section or move on to the next discussion point? Because this is the last discussion point that was.
Okay, yes, let's go to move. Oh, I forgot. To move on to the next discuss section. And for the next discuss section, is there any suggestions or questions?
Apologies.
I'm sorry, Priscilla. I believe that what the staff was saying is that we've done all the discussions now.
Oh yeah, I was asking to move on and then I got confused. Yeah, I asked to move on if we can go to 8:10.
Excitingly, this is B1.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, folks. Yeah, I know, right?
Congratulations.
This was originally going to be my section. Co-chair Michelle Wesley, do you want to do it? There's only one item.
I would love to do the one item one. Okay. B, investigations. B1, referral of criminal investigations. B1A, the board has the authority to refer cases to the district attorney or other authority for criminal investigation when the incident or allegations indicate possible criminal activity. And that's.
Thank you, Co-Chair Charlie. Is there any questions or suggestions for B1? B1A? No? There is something in the chat. Or staff is said by the officers. Yes, Commissioner Sima?
Just for clarification, refer cases to district attorney or other criminal, or other authority for criminal investigation. Would this be like including like internal affairs and stuff like that as well? Like just a little clarity on what other authorities are.
Yes, Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, okay. Answer your question, Commissioner Hussaini. It originally said, we took this from San Diego County, I think, and it said the district attorney or the grand jury, and the district attorney, at least in Oregon, district attorney convenes and runs the grand juries. So that didn't seem like, it seemed repetitive and not necessary for our purposes. So, but in case there's some other authority that sometime, let's say that there's a state authority that investigates police misconduct that's not related to the district attorney, we want to leave that in there so they can turn it over to them. And then just to address the staff's point in the chat, I think that's really important for us to note that this is, yes, alleged misconduct by the officers. And we explicitly were saying we didn't want to have any kind of alleged misconduct by the complainant be investigated as a result of the person filing a complaint. So yes, I think it'd be a very good idea to add indicate possible criminal activity by the officer.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Sima, okay. Is there any additional comments? No? Okay, I can ask, is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was to the proposed change? Is there a general agreement to changing from what it was to the proposed change? Can we move on to the next one? Thank you.
So Co-Chair Michelle Wesley, do you want me to do this one then? Can't see you.
She said
yes. Okay. Okay. So B2. I'm going to just see. I'm going to use my version of the. Oh my God, this is pretty long. Okay, this goes through B2L. Just so you know, strap yourselves in for this. Okay, you ready? All right. B2. Oh, it goes through M apparently. That's very strange. Okay, B2A. Beyond the basic elements listed here, the board shall determine investigative procedures to provide guidance for staff operations. B2B. Discussion point. Investigations shall follow federal and state constitutions and laws, city charter, board rules and regulations. That should probably be capital B for board. Collective bargaining agreement, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, ethics code regarding personal integrity, independent and thorough oversight, transparency and confidentiality, respectful and unbiased treatment, outreach and relationships with stakeholders, agency self-examination, and commitment to policy review, professional excellence, and primary obligation to the community. I'm going to just pause now because we have a lot more to go through before we come back to this. That NACOLE is these are not required of agencies. It's a it's an informal agency that exists as an umbrella for any oversight board to be part of, and so you can't necessarily impose this on a city. But the question on the floor is whether or not to voluntarily put these into the city code. All right, so we'll come back to that for the discussion. B2C. In all investigations often involve shootings and other cases which may involve criminal misconduct, officers shall receive Liebarger/Garrity warnings that they are being compelled to testify for administrative investigation, and the content of the interview cannot be used in a criminal proceeding. And I'll just note here, and I thought I had this note flagged, that this is this is being addressed in more detail in the Access Information Subcommittee's proposals, but this is just the policy around the investigation. All right, B2D. Investigations must be ethical, independent, thorough, timely, fair, and impartial. Okay, B2E. So here's a list of what investigations should include: interviews of the complainant, officers, and witnesses, gathering evidence, including photos, videos, proof of injuries, and other relevant medical records, examining police roll calls, logs, assignments, and other relevant information, and site visits as deemed appropriate. All right, so the next one, B2F, is interviews with officers are all recorded. B2F sub 1, another thing for discussion. Interviews with community members will be recorded unless the community member requests not to be recorded. In these instances, the request by the community member shall be documented, and a stenographer will be enlisted to ensure the interview's answers are captured accurately. B2F2, discuss. However, a community member concerned about confidentiality of certain information may request that parts of their transcript be redacted for confidentiality purposes, and that kind of goes back to the discussion we had earlier. B2G, civilian interviews can take place at locations other than the oversight body's office. B2H, incomplete or unverified complaints can be investigated if the oversight body determines an investigation is warranted. B2I, investigation shall be completed even if an officer retires, resigns, or is fired, and that was something Commissioner McDowell talked about earlier. B2J, anonymous complaints and complaints with unidentified officers will be investigated to the full extent possible, and if necessary, left open pending identifying the persons involved as needed. And that came from a discussion from our last meeting or a previous meeting. B2K, investigators shall have access to and be authorized to examine and copy without payment of a fee any Bureau information and records, including confidential and legally privileged information and records, so long as privilege is not waived as to third parties and police databases subject to any applicable state or federal law. And that's also something that's being discussed in the Access to Information Subcommittee. B2L, all Bureau employees shall be truthful, professional, and courteous in all interactions with the board. No member shall conceal, impede, or interfere with the filing, investigation, or determination of findings of a complaint. Now, see, there's some changes in there. I'm not sure where they came from. Okay, and B2M, information on compelling officer testimony, subpoenas, and other related items such as keeping confidential information shall be included from the Access to Information Subcommittee's work. And obviously, that's not how city code would be written, but that's just a note for us that we don't have to come up with that because somebody else is working on it. Okay, so I'm done with my. Thanks.
Okay, let's review the items that are for discuss first. The first item. Okay. Thank you. SB2B. Is that, yeah, Commissioner Catherine?
So I just had a question about where it says collective bargaining agreement. Do we mean agreements? What are we talking about there? Are we talking about the do we want to say, yeah, I mean, I guess applicable collective, I mean, we're just talking about the collective bargaining agreements in place with members of the Bureau. Is that what that's about?
Yeah, Co-Chair Dan has the answer. You're on mute.
Yes, it should be plural. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there any additional comments? No? Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
just to follow through on what Commissioner McDowell was concerned about, I think we should say relevant collective bargaining agreements. But my big question, the question that co-chairs are presenting to you is, do you all agree that we should have those NAC-OLE list of what makes a good investigation be part of the code for the new board? Some people are nodding their heads.
Yes,
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. We can go to the next one that I believe is B2F1. Yes, Commissioner Catherine?
Yeah, so I had a question on the previous B2, I think it's B2E, yeah. So investigations include, and are we saying shall include, may include, will include? I'm just not sure if what we're saying here. Are we saying they have to include these, they can include these. I just wondered what the intent of that.
Okay.
What the intent is there.
Yes, Co-Chair Charlie or Co-Chair Dan, do you want to clarify that?
Sure, yeah, and then I want to introduce the next discussion point. If this is to the commissioner's, this is resolved to commissioner's satisfaction. I think what the problem is that not all of these things are going to be part of every investigation. So if we say it shall include video and there's no video, that could be problematic. But it shall include, you know, I guess, to the extent they are available or something like that, right?
Then I think you're maybe saying may include, if you're.
But then it sounds like they can decide not to include some of them, right? So we want to say that they shall include every piece of information that's available to them.
So shall include as available, and then.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Shall include as available. Okay, and then Co-Chair Dan, you're going to explain B2F1.
Actually, I wasn't going to explain. Actually, I was going to call on. Oh, I see my co-chair has her hand up too.
Co-Chair, yes, Charlie, please.
Okay, so what did you settle on? Investigations. Can?
Investigations shall include as available. Okay?
Yeah, but available, what if they exist but aren't available?
Right. Well, I don't know a legal term for if they exist. If you have good language for that, is that what we want to say? Shall include if they exist. Sort of seems.
Are we saying something like as reasonably available? Is that the idea that, you know, if we can get them easily, if they exist and they're reasonably accessible, then they should include these? I'm not quite sure what the intent is.
Yeah, I think I like that. If they exist and are reasonably available is good, because that way, you know, if something exists and then they can't get to it for some reason, like it's buried under concrete, then.
And you know where I come from when I ask these questions, Dan.
Yeah, I know that they're going to try to avoid something.
Yes.
Or bury it in concrete. Sure. All right. Are you okay with that then?
Sure.
Okay. So what I was going to say, actually, Facilitator Lara, was that for B2F1, that came from a discussion point that Commissioner Hussaini brought up, and I wanted to call on him to weigh in on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Sima? Yes, well, then I don't know if Commissioner Sima, okay, I will pass it to Co-Chair Charlie and then Commissioner Sima. Oh, Co-Chair Charlie, no. Commissioner Sima? I'm sorry.
No input here.
Okay. Thank you. Then we can, if there are no questions, we can move to B2F2.
You're trading in your skinny jeans this season for a wider leg. Here are the best shoes.
Okay, I don't know what that was, but we can go to B2F2. Okay, is there any discussion, questions on B2? Yes, Commissioner Debbie.
So you're not saying that you could, that the complainant could redact parts of the transcript that are necessary to complete the investigation, are you?
Oh, here's my hand.
Commissioner Co-Chair Dan?
No, this would kind of be like, if they started telling a story and they said the name of a colleague or, you know, a community member or a family member that they didn't want because they didn't get their permission to draw them into the investigation, they don't necessarily want to reveal that name to somebody. That's the kind of thing we were thinking about. But I think the reason that we flagged this is, I think the staff was trying to hint this by scrolling over to the side, is that we wanted to know if we can do this in a way that's fair to the police. Like, we need to have balance the needs of the complainant with the needs of the investigation. So let's say they do say the name of somebody and that person has critical information for the board, and then they try to subpoena that person, and, you know, so at some point it's possible that person's identity could be revealed to the officer. In fact, in theory, they will be, according to the contract. So would the officer also have things that they could say during their investigation that they would want, like if they said, yeah, you know, I was having my braces redone at the dental surgeon, and that's why I was feeling bad that day. That might not be something they want necessarily to be put in part of the public record either. So is there something we can do to also make this equal for the officer side?
And I will pass it to Commissioner Debbie. I'm sorry, Commissioner Catherine.
So I think that we probably just need to be specific about whether we're talking about redaction and confidentiality vis-a-vis the public versus redaction and confidentiality vis-a-vis the people directly involved in the complaint proceeding, which would be the complainant, the investigators, and the officer. So I mean, it seems to me that the you know, I'm not very troubled by either the complainant or the officer wanting. I guess I'm less troubled about allowing confidentiality, allowing them to request confidentiality vis-a-vis the public for certain things, but I have a lot more concern about confidentiality versus as to the people directly involved in the processing of the complaint. So that, I think that is pretty much what you just said, Dan. I don't quite know how to say that other than I mean, that is typically how, you know, court proceedings and other proceedings go. There's a protective order that allows people who are in the proceeding to see certain things, but the public who have not signed that protective order are not given access to the redacted materials.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. And I just want to let you know that's 8:53. We would like to finish or flag this for discussion, B2, and then go to a public meeting. But Commissioner Kosher Dan, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, well, playing off what Commissioner Iona was saying, maybe we should say, request parts of the transcript be redacted for confidentiality purposes, so long as that does not interfere with the ability to fully investigate, or something like that. Or something along those lines. You know, I think it is getting late, but I think that the idea would be to that I just want to reemphasize a community concern that is underlying this, that we don't want necessarily for a person to name the name of somebody that did not voluntarily want to be part of the investigation, and then have the officer find out that person's name and then do something with that information. So I think that there is you know, reasonable concern about some of the information even being shared with, as you were saying, Commissioner McDowell, parties to this. It should be kept confidential between the community member and the board, and not shared with the officer if that kind of fear exists.
Okay, thank you. Should I ask, or should you want to? I'm gonna ask, since it's the last item that was for discussion in B2, unless you wanna flag this to get back later.
I will just say I have a little more to say on it, so I don't want to, make us go late, but I guess I think there's a little more discussion. At least I would want to engage on this issue.
And it's only for B2, F2, or you want to discuss, you're suggesting to discuss the whole B2?
I have one other comment on one other item, just the meaning of unverified. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, whether it meant unsigned or, so that was the only other thing I want to discuss in this section.
Okay, let's move on from B to F2. And what is the other comment that you have, Commissioner Catherine?
On B2H, where it says incomplete or unverified complaints, we're not requiring verification of complaints, so I didn't know what verification unverified meant here. Verification typically means like you sign it and say everything here, you swear to the truth of it, but I don't think that, if I remember, we were not requiring that above when we were talking about intake. So maybe we're trying to say incomplete or unsigned, but we're not really requiring that either. I would just say incomplete, I guess. Okay, yeah, that takes care of my concern.
Incomplete complaints. Okay, thank you. We're gonna flag F2, B2, F2. Let's try to check the rest. B2, we can move on the rest of the information. I don't know, we can see everything on the, it's hard. Okay. Is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was? The changes that are in green, not including F2. Okay, yeah, staff?
If I can suggest, Facilitator Laura, to do the parts that can be seen on the screen, and then I can fit it into 2 screens that way. So
Okay.
2 different sets of questions.
That's great.
Ease of public record keeping.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, is there a strong opposition to changing from what it was to the proposed changes on the items that are seen at the screens, from B2EA to B2E3? Is there a general agreement to changes from the items you seen on the street, B2A to B2E3? Yes. Thank you. Let's move on to the next part of B2. Okay. Besides B2, F2 is going to be for discuss later. From B2J to B2M, is there a strong opposition to changing as it was to the proposed changes? And is there a general agreement to changing from what it was to the proposed changes? Okay, can we move on? Thank you. We're gonna move, congratulations, you only have 2 flag items from what we reviewed today. And I'm gonna go to the next item on the agenda because it's 8:58. And the next item of the agenda is next steps. Thank you. Staff?
Thank you. Yeah, so we got very close to the end on this one. It goes through B6. So to get through B2, to get an idea of how much is left of this document. And then there is sections 3 through 6, I guess they'd be lettered C, D, E, and F in the other document, as well as the flow chart, which was discussed and may need to be adapted depending on the adaptations you may or may not make to the text of the document. In the next 12 days, we'll be doing 2 quick cycles of review. The first will be sending this version of the draft out to all subcommittee members tonight or tomorrow for your comments and feedback by early next week. After that, co-chairs may update the document and recirculate. But anything that's sent in and track changes will then be able to be displayed as sort of will save the time necessary to collect the proposal during the next meeting if members of the subcommittee submit it in advance and track changes. And that'll be visible when we get to January 21st, which will be the next meeting of the subcommittee. On January 21st, the subcommittee will work through the documents and make changes with the intent of trying to refer it to the full commission, hopefully by the end of that meeting. There may be more details on any of these things as well. I'm seeing Commissioner Dan in the chat has noted how many pages are, I believe that's how many pages are remaining. But yeah, that is the general frame. The subcommittee has one additional scheduled meeting, which is the 21st. As of right now, as we get closer to that time frame, we'll be able to give a little bit more detail as to whether or not there's any possibility of more time beyond that. It's in part dependent on how the other two subcommittee subcommittees, how far they've progressed. The good news is that the subcommittee on access to information has finished its work and has referred that document on. But there is another subcommittee that may need a little additional time. We'll kind of figure that out as we go. Yeah, any questions on any of that specifically? I can pass to Commissioner Catherine.
I will pass it to Commissioner Christian.
Hi, thanks. You might have already said this, and I may have just missed it. I think I might have in that little tail end. There was no estimation of like what time a meeting might happen on the 21st, correct? It's just a possibility right now. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, check the chat on that for just in just a second. I'm typing something right now on that, but yeah.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Catherine.
That was my question also, both the start time and the length of the meeting on the 21st.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And the staff already answered in the chat.
Yeah, so just for the sake of transparency, the exact nature of individual members' complaints is not something that needs to be done in public, but I'm using the chat to ask if anyone has a conflict in the 12 to 6 p.m. window, which is the broad window of time for that date. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if it's all about next steps, we will now take open public comment on the issues that PAC is discussing. Our community members can also tell their stories about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you'd like to speak. Okay, I don't see anybody. Then we can conclude our meeting, but before that, we can go to our section of garden plot. And I will pass it to the co-chairs first. Do you have any item to the garden plot? Co-chair Dan?
Yeah, well, I want to keep in mind as we move this forward to the full commission eventually, and then city council, those 3 items that I listed at the top. So I don't know where to capture those, but the 3 big things we're asking for is, right now, and is that everybody be assigned an advocate, that internal affairs be doing investigations for officer-on-officer complaints, and the police review board only be used for officer-on-officer complaints. And yeah, so I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost. I'm not sure. Yeah, so maybe put that in the garden plot so we can make sure to pull it back out when we're presenting this. Thanks.
Thank you. Co-chair Charlie, do you have something for the garden plot? Okay. The staff? No?
There's a couple legal questions that were raised to ask attorneys about and they're already flagged in the document just as a discussion question to continue discussing, but maybe if the comment doesn't necessarily say that it's a attorney question, they may be attorney questions. So that's all I wanted to mention.
Thank you. Okay, then we can end our meeting. But before that, I want to remind, Coach Sheridan? Okay, so as I want to remind everyone that now you can submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postmail. Thank you to all the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions. Thank you for the interpreters that were here at our meeting. And finally, thank you for the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. If you are not already signed for email updates, please also sign up to receive updates from the PAC. It's now 9:06 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much and good night.